All right. And checking 1, 2, 3. Hey, this is John Ree with another edition of my rebooted podcast series now called Enterprise Hits and Misses Radio. Yes, we are about to go live on LinkedIn. In fact, it's probably already streaming, but there may be a second delay. So welcome to the show. And I've got Vijay Vijayasankar here, my triumphant returning champion. I was trying to figure out when you first did a podcast with me, and I think it was 2009. I'm sure I can figure it out with a little more effort, but it was right around then.
Yeah, it seems like a long time ago. It's so fantastic to do this again with you.
Yeah, it's good times. So for those of you who are joining up into the feed, I'm going to be talking with Vijay in a special countdown edition of our show. We're going to count down our most hated predictions for 2021, which is going to be really tough to narrow that down to the 4. And then I've challenged Vijay. This will get even tougher for him. He's got to pick his 5 favorite blog posts of all time that he's written on his blog. Dude, that's going to be tough. You've written a lot of stuff, so that's like asking you to pick your favorite child or your favorite dog. You know?
Well, the one good thing is I'm not totally, emotionally attached to what I write, right? So it's that part is fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to finding out, and I've actually picked your top blog posts as well for me. So we'll have a nice back and forth on that.
Yeah.
Anyone who's watching, feel free to chime in as we go. And the other thing is that Vijay and I haven't compared notes here on what we're gonna pick. So, but the one thing I did on the teaser plug for the show, I said we're going to talk about AI, next gen projects, leadership, and more. And that's because those are topics that Vijay, I know you're passionate about, that you've written a lot on in the past. So I'm sure I felt confident those topics are going to come up one way or the other. So,
indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we get into any of our countdowns, I do want to take a little step back here because I was thinking about, just the evolution of your career, because you started out as a programmer.
I did.
And then I remember many years where you were, an SAP consultant, because I remember back in the day, we'd look forward every year to your Road Ahead for SAP Consultants post, right? Where you kind of, so it's really interesting to see that whole thing evolve. And I just wanted to sort of ask you about, like, when did the whole thing around realizing that blogging your way through your career was going to be like a key part of everything? Like, when did that start to occur to you?
Sometime in the mid 2000s, for sure. In the 2007 or so time frame is what I think the right timeline would be. It's all thanks to Marilyn Pratt, right? I mean, there's
the Marilyn Pratt shout out. Yep.
Literally nobody else deserves credit for that, right? So she was the one who gently prodded me onto the SEN platform, and then later BPX, right, the Business Process Expert platform. And I wrote something there, and after I posted my third one, she kind of highlighted it in the homepage, so a lot more people started reading what I write. And then I think a year or two later, maybe 2 years later or so, I figured there are a lot of topics that I like to write about, but SEN is probably not the right place to say those things. So I went ahead and created a WordPress blog site, and then I eventually bought a domain, andvijaysays.com, and
right.
to that. Yeah, that's how it's been going. So about 10 years since I've had my own blogging site. Probably have written, I have no idea actually how many I've written, but I'm going to guesstimate maybe 500 blogs in that time. I do write about 40, 50 a year, I think. And, I'm not particularly structured, and it's not like I post a blog a week or anything like that. There are days when I've posted 2, and there are months I have posted nothing, right? So it's whenever that happens, that inspiration comes, I whip out my phone and I type it.
So I'm not going to allow any of the audience members to ask you questions about IBM, like for example, all the moves that have happened lately, because we didn't go through IBM PR, and I didn't want to go through IBM PR because we would never be doing this show. It would just take too long.
PR as me, right?
Yeah. But why don't you just for the sake of context, why don't you just give us a sense of what you currently do now.
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm an integrated services leader at IBM. What that essentially means is we do two types of services for our clients. Everything on the infrastructure side and everything on the consulting side. So on the infrastructure side is what we call global technology services, and the consulting side is what we call global business services. I lead the teams for both for one of our largest clients, and definitely the oldest client that we have, who we have had the privilege of having as a client for 107 years. So it's a pretty cool job. First time that I'm doing that role. And prior to that, I was the CTO for North America. So it's a nice change of pace to move from a very technology-oriented role to back to a P&L position, but only for one client, right? So it's that's my day job.
Do you ever miss the hands-on stuff, whether it's the coding or the configuration of ERP systems or what have you? Do you ever miss that stuff?
So I strangely don't miss ERP very much. I haven't opened an SAP screen since 2012, I think, or maybe 2013. I'm still very much in touch with the SAP world, at least, right? So I loosely keep track of what happens there, but I haven't tried anything hands-on. But from a programming perspective, I'm fairly hands-on, as in I still code. It's very difficult for me to spend any week where I don't type some code. So that happens all the time, right? I'm a developer at heart, first and foremost. So I'm still quite sharp in my coding skills. I keep telling my wife that if the IT executive gig doesn't pan out, this is plan B, right? I can always go back and code for a living.
Absolutely. So we're pretty far into the pandemic life now. Like putting vaccines and return to work stuff aside, how are you feeling about like the state of project delivery at the moment? Is it the kind of thing where we're now able to resume pretty much even the largest scale projects, or is there still a little more hesitancy around the big initiatives at this point?
So not really, right? And this honestly surprises me, though we shouldn't be surprised, at least in our case. So I have a very large team, right? Thousands of people that report into me. We switched to remote working in 2 days flat, with no loss in productivity. But the reason for that, obviously, is it's part of a business continuity process that we have to test it and certify it, and we have to stay ready for this eventuality. Nobody thought, certainly not me, that we have to ever do it at this scale. But when the time came, we knew exactly what to do to get everybody remote, and that happened so smoothly, to the extent that our clients even started asking us, so when are you guys going to move back home to work? Because they didn't see any loss of productivity, and they were actually quite surprised that we had already moved in 2 days. So we haven't seen any difficulty with remote work in terms of our ability to deliver, right? So that's been a blessing. Obviously, the good process and diligence and so on helped. So I give the process some credit, but it's mostly people, right? It's amazing to me that none of us have ever in our lives worked 100% remote. I certainly haven't, and I have done this a long time. I've worked remotely, but I would always go to a client site, fairly frequently, or to an IBM office or something. So this is the longest in my entire working career that I'm working sitting at my home office all the time. And same is true with several colleagues. And, everybody adapted. And it's not without its stress levels. Unforeseen things do happen. One of my favorite moments is a younger colleague of mine who has a young son, probably 5-7 years old or so. He was having a business review with me, and I saw the kid behind. So the dad is facing the computer like I am. I could see the kid behind the scene. I could see him take aim with the frisbee. And like a half second later, the frisbee came and knocked the MacBook out of the table, right? The one that I was watching. So I could see the frisbee coming and hitting like in a split split second. And the
Perfect
laptop
shot.
and the dad called me in panic. I
Oh my
apologized.
God, that's so funny.
It's totally cool. It's so. And I have other colleagues, including executives in IBM who have very young children, right, young babies, who often have the baby on their lap when they come into a meeting, and that's totally fine too. I mean, we know each other's families very well. Many of my colleagues know my daughter very well because if daddy is stuck in the room for a long time, she usually sneaks in with a little snack to keep daddy going. So everybody knows each other's families well, pets well. I have a couple of dogs, so they sometimes jump up on my lap while I'm on a meeting. Nobody takes it bad, right? Colleagues, customers, my bosses, clients, nobody takes it bad. But it comes with its own stresses. And the one thing I learned was nobody has all the answers, right? So initially we tried to take a stance that maybe we can cut down to answers fast, so we avoid chaos and keep moving. The reality is nobody does. I certainly don't, right? So we have been having regular checkpoints and so on, and try to minimize fatigue for people. Everybody overworked a lot initially, right? So that lack of productivity loss that we saw, it was mostly because people were killing themselves. It took some time for us to all realize that we are just burning out, and we calmed down and got into a rhythm. Completely fine now. It's not as much of a challenge. It's not that it's not a challenge. We just figured out a good way to go about it.
Yeah, interesting. I actually think that's one of the best things about the pandemic life is in the business sense is the camming and the video meetings bring us into each other's lives in a way that I don't think we ever quite felt before. And despite the isolation, there's this interesting sense of like kind of getting to know people in a different way, right? Like you got your kid on your lap, right? I mean, that's in a way that's kind of real, right? Like that's our lives, and the work life just barrier kind of went away a long time ago. We might as well like quit pretending like we have this professional demeanor where there's no kids and we have a certain dress code, and it's like, come on, man, like that wasn't working for years anyway.
Since March or early April, when we completely switched to this remote way of working, I think I had maybe 3 meetings in total out of God knows 1,000 meetings where I actually wore a dress shirt. Right, I show up in a regular T-shirt. And what you see is what you get, right? That's pretty much it. And it's the same with my colleagues and my clients. First month or so, we would see people, wearing a suit jacket onto a web call. That stopped very quickly. Everybody realized that that's not the important thing, right? So some people find it important to dress up in the morning before they start work because it's it's a ritual, right? It gets them into
absolutely.
Totally fine. If that's your thing, do it, right? But just don't, make it a big deal if somebody else doesn't want to do it. It's also important that, initially everybody thought being on video is the big thing. Then we quickly realized, some of our colleagues did not want to be on video. I had a very smart woman, lady in my team, who very openly said in the meeting, hey, early in the morning I don't have the time to get my hair in a shape that it's presentable. I don't want to be on video. And we said, that's totally fine. If you don't want to be on video, don't be on video. Let's not make that the key to success. Right. So let everybody find their own balance. I think it's a big part of getting to this equilibrium.
Cool. For those of you that are dropping in, this show is designed to drop in and out a bit. We're going to start our countdowns pretty soon of the most hated predictions for 2021 and also Vijay's favorite blogs. Don't be afraid to comment in the stream, but just remember, if you comment, I'm going to respond to your comment. This is not a passive video watching experience unless you want it to be so. Anyhow, by the way, Vijay, I don't know if you can see that video ticker in the top left, but there's more than 2 people watching right now. That thing is like, that's bullshit. So I checked on that before. I don't know what that is exactly, but anyhow, volume metrics, man.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you also, just in terms of the project. So, like you said that large scale project delivery is not an issue. So that's good. But I get the sense, right, that customers are being pretty particular about the types of projects they want to do right now. So where is the action for you guys as far as what the needs are right now?
Everybody is constantly replanning, right? So it is hard that the macroeconomic forecasts have not been great, right? So the secondary, tertiary effects of one industry hurting another or helping another, that was not easy to find out at the beginning of the pandemic. So what that means is, when we say agile as a development methodology, agile as a business practice, as in being nimble and being able to move fast, has essentially meant that there is a lot of replanning. So
Right.
it is a good thing that everybody understands that, and backlog can be managed more dynamically these days, and people don't feel a lot of grief about that. But we have seen tremendous replanning from our client and also in-house. One day you're working on say solving a customer acquisition problem, and maybe that stops becoming an issue because not a lot of customers are going to come in new. You have to pivot very quickly to employee experience, because now a lot of people who are not used to working from home suddenly need new solutions to be productive, and this team has to pivot, change their mindset from an external customer's frame of mind to an internal employee's frame of mind, and design a solution for them, right? So that kind of big time pivots used to be fairly rare in the past, and we would deliberate on that a long time before we do those projects. Now that's not a difficulty at all. We just jump in and we pivot, and we start working on it very, very quickly. So agility is definitely a big deal now.
Vijay, we got Alan Berkson of Freshworks calling BS a little bit on agility. Do businesses really understand how to add agility?
Yeah, let me put it this way. There are parts of the business where agility is possible and parts where it is not, right? So there are hard problems like supply chain and actual manufacturing and so on, where you cannot turn on a dime. Things do take a little bit of time to rejigger and make it work. It's a lot about the mental state, right? You if you're used to a certain amount of work as your base estimate in mind, and suddenly the problem statement changed, it is pretty tough, right? So I did see Alan pretty much making the same point, right? That it's not just about tools. It's absolutely true. It is not about tools. It's a mindset problem for the large part. But if businesses did not get agility 6 months ago, I can more or less say with some certainty that they do get it now, because it has become an existential crisis for many of them, right? So it's now no longer a luxury. It's not a conference topic anymore, right? So they may not call it agility. They might just say, let's move faster, nimbler, cheaper, etc. But what they truly mean is what the rest of us have been calling agility for a long time. None of them care about tools very much. But the reality is, some of these tools, especially one tool that I never used very much in the past, I use an awful lot now, is Mural. So Mural helps whiteboard very easily, right? So you can use like little sticky notes on a screen with several people in a team. You can quickly brainstorm, you can prioritize, etc. Things that you would typically get a team into a conference room into a big whiteboard and do. Now we can mimic that to some degree with the help of a tool. So it's not that tools are bad, but tool doesn't make a project, right? It's that mindset change that it is important. And also understand things like, for example, John, you followed ERP for as long as I have, maybe longer. A lot of grief about ERP projects is these things called budget overrun, and estimates were bad and so on. Practically nobody worries about those things anymore, right? Because you're not talking about 2-year projects anymore. You're talking about 2-month projects, sometimes 2 weeks long projects. And everybody knows that things are so fluid that a lot of trust has built in the ecosystem that we may need to change or scrap very, very quickly, and people are not spending an inordinate amount of time worrying about it.
Before we get into our countdowns, I wanted to also mention that one of my favorite things about your blog is occasionally you'll take on a buzzword and deconstruct it. And the funny thing about it is that invariably, if you do that, within about 6 months in your job, you're now required to sell whatever it is that you dismantled before. It's uncanny, Vijay. It's happened again and again.
Oh my God. It is so true. It is so true.
And then you have to write a blog post later saying, yeah, I did take this apart like 6 months ago, but now let me explain it from this. And you made me think of it just now because you have a classic blog post in your And Vijay Says archives about Agile and making fun of Agile.
Like 10 years ago or so, I think.
I think you've done it more than once. But you know, I'll tell you where I come down on this is that I think there's a very specific methodology, which I think of as Agile as a capital A, that needs to be debated and understood in a very specific context of a way to manage a project. And there's actually a lot of very specific, almost scientific like methods around how that type of Agile is done. Then there's Agile with the small a, as I define it, which is more just being a more agile business, which is not as tied to the methodology. And to Alan, I think that's really what Alan's hitting at as well as in his point about agility. And the way I look at that is that that's a continuum. There's never an end state where you're agile. It's always something that you're pushing for and trying to get further. And in my mind, the reason it makes sense is because why did we go into these holes for 2 years and come out and ask customers if they like this product? Why did we sign these 2-year agreements without ever coming up for air? It makes so much more sense to have, a cycle of constant feedback with all the stakeholder groups that you purport to serve. And to me, that's sort of the Agile lesson. Now, to what extent you can incorporate that in your business and into your processes and into the software that you use is a whole different can of worms.
Yeah, it is. To be perfectly honest, Agile. The capital A Agile is no magic bullet either, right? And I had serious issues with that throughout my career. I've written and spoken out loud against it a few times. It's not that I think it's a bad methodology. It's just it has its place. And when we think that is the only way to work is when we land in trouble. I keep making a joke that you don't build a rocket, right, with the capital A Agile. And there is a scaled version of this called a scaled Agile, right? So SAFe, right? The SAFe method, which is awesome. But if you look at it, it would look, or at least in practice, it will approximate very closely to what an old school waterfall model looks like. Because for a certain amount of volume or structure, a lot of dollars being spent, businesses want predictability, right? So no CFO will say that, okay, it takes whatever it takes. That almost never happens. So when you start putting all those constraints together, they want some kind of predictability, which means here is a planned amount or effort or something, and here is the actual, and you want to compare these things. Pretty quickly, we are back to the old world, right? I mean, which is where the large SAP projects used to happen. We all cried out loud, right? Some of us louder than others. So this is the thing, right? You have an in-between stage where things actually work quite fine. But when we take a religious approach that, the capital A Agile is the only way to do it, or waterfall is the only way to do it, and so on, that's when it just gets ugly, right? Because that's not reality. It is, and business doesn't care at all, right? It's very hard to have a conversation with business on waterfall versus Agile because it sounds trivial to them, as in it's not important to them. Like a finance organization that files regulatory reports, it's tough for them to move out of cycle to introduce a new change because the government expects something from them at certain periods, and that needs a certain process, like the close process every quarter. So you can speed it up a little and so on. But if you try to implement wholesale change in a short amount of time, it's not easy. Even during the pandemic, it is not easy. So that pragmatic nature, that the religious definitions don't matter as much. I think that realization the pandemic has definitely brought into both IT and business. I see that routinely now.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Let's do a countdown of our top 4 most disliked predictions for 2021. I have a few lined up. Let's start with you, Vijay.
I'll let you go first, and
you want me to do my number 4? Okay, my number 4 is courtesy of ZDNet. I'm not going to call out the author because I think sometimes these poor folks are required to do these tedious predictions pieces. And by the way, before I do it, I will say that I do participate in this in kind of an antagonistic way with my annual Unpredictions collaboration with Brian Summer on Diginomica, which is going to be out, I believe, next Tuesday. So we've got a lot of work to do this weekend polishing this up. And the infamous Den Howlett has contributed some for the first time. So this is going to be a really juicy edition. Anyway, so it's kind of our cathartic reaction to the deluge of predictions that we receive from every PR rep in the United States and beyond. Anyway, so my number 4 is in 2021, edge computing will hit an inflection point. This one's particularly brutal because not only do you have the hype over edge computing, which is just a fancy way of saying stuff that you carry around with you, or then you combine that with inflection point, which is one of my most hated phrases because it's totally misused. As Neil Radin pointed out, there's actually a very specific mathematical definition that we've lost track of there. But on top of that, Tom Dunlap asked me on Twitter, what does it mean when you reach that? And I said, it means that you can get paid as a consultant for talking about it when you don't know what it is. So that's when you know you've reached an inflection point. So.
Yeah, the thing about inflection point, and Neil makes a very good point, right? That you typically know an inflection point after the fact, right? It's very rare to say that it will hit an inflection point, right? A curve that keeps going in one direction. It's hard to say that at that X amount of time, right? In 2021, it's going to change direction. That's bullshit. So I do agree on edge computing hitting an inflection point. I do think it will happen. But putting a timeline to it like this definitely was a dumb idea.
Indeed.
Yeah. We can't, I mean, if we just look back at self-driving cars, right? If we believed everything that the important people, I'm not going to take names, because some of them are very close friends and so on. Right? We should have seen practically every other car on the road by now as self-driving. That did not happen. It's not to say that 50% of the cars on the road won't be self-driving. In very near future, it might happen. But people were so passionate about the topic, right, that they said that will happen. It's like the same thing. It's all with good intentions. Like the fuel-based energy production will be next to nothing by 2020 is what we used to say,
right.
10 years ago. That did not happen, right? I mean, it is definitely coming down, but it did not happen. People underestimate this totally.
Well, Vijay, my favorite one is the IT skill shortage that was breathlessly predicted in like 1997 that we've never truly hit. It's just hilarious. It's like there's going to be a IT skills shortage crisis, and still waiting on that.
Yeah,
after all these years.
Interestingly, right? So I'll tell my my prediction, right? That I thought like went bonkers. Is mainframe is dead.
Mainframe, right? Yeah, the death of the mainframe, right? Put that in a timeline.
Never died. I don't think mainframe will die before I die. Right? It's not going to happen. I obviously have made a lot of fun of mainframe, and I did not know anything about mainframe. Now I know a lot about mainframe because my clients use it, right? So I have studied about it and I understand the architecture better, so on and so forth. And it is actually quite difficult to get applications that need that mainframe kind processing out of mainframe and put on a cloud. There are very serious technical limitations outside mainframe for those kinds of applications, not for everything. Mainframe is not needed for many of the applications. You can offload several workloads out of it. But the thing that mainframe is going to die, no. Vast majority of planes and trains and others fly today because of mainframe-based systems, right? Weather forecasting, right? And many other things like bank transactions and so on. Insurance claims, right? They all work on mainframes. They worked on mainframes before I was born, and they contain. I'm not young, right? So it's been there for a while. It will stay there for a while, right? So the mainframe being dead is like one of my favorite predictions to poke fun at.
All right, let's hear your number 4.
So the next one that I would say, and I definitely beg forgiveness from several people here, too many to count on, is blockchain, right? So again, I am not anti-blockchain. I do think blockchain serves several useful purposes, but blockchain replacing everything and becoming like the ubiquitous platform did not happen. So most certainly did not happen, right? So instead of hundreds of thousands of projects, we probably had hundreds or thousands of projects at the most across the world, right? It did not become like the common platform for everything and I don't think it will get there in the next year either. I do believe very much in the technology, but it does need more good problems and more people to. So I'll give one thing to my blockchain friends. The trouble is not the technology. The trouble is not a lot of people like to come together on any one platform. The power of blockchain is when a lot of people get together on any one thing. So, for example, a shipping company like Maersk, which actually worked with IBM to have a blockchain solution, that kind of worked because Maersk was a big blockchain, player in their market. So when the big guy like a Walmart or a Maersk jumps in and can dictate that this is how this industry's future looks like, then it kind of works. Everybody else will fall in line. But if you look at like 10 banks who all more or less do similar things, they're all large enough that they all want to do their own thing. It's pretty tough to get them all together on one platform, right? It's like the classic old SAP thing. Like they all say, my sales order processing is very different. No, it is not very different. I know that because I worked in all 10 of these companies, but each company will still believe that they are all unique, right? So that is primarily the big difficulty I see in blockchain. It's not really a technology challenge that's holding it back. It's everybody thinking they're unique, or at least that's my view on that. What's your next one?
Yeah, and you know the funny thing there too, just as a contrast, I think like I go back a few years ago, I think about people who were saying that blockchain was going to revolutionize everything, and in fact, it's AI that's become the pervasive technology. And you know, not that AI is necessarily changing everything. We can talk about that, and we're going to get to it, but that you can contrast the two in terms of the traction, and you can see the difference. Not every technology reaches the same level. Eventually, blockchain, when it matures, is going to be a socket wrench in the tools that you can use on a project, and that's just not sexy enough for the people that advocate for it. But anyhow, my number 3, I was going to make fun of a service mesh prediction just because I can't stand the service mesh phrase, but instead I chose a prediction from a company called Sisu, no offense, augmented analytics platform. I wish you luck in 2021. But ditch the dashboard, long live the dynamic feed. Manually curated dashboards will finally start to give way as business owners consume data through dynamic views of data, including insight news feeds and personalized results. Well, I hate to break it to you, but dashboards aren't going anywhere.
Nope.
And whatever it is your personalized dynamic feed is, whatever the hell that is, I'd love to see it. But anyhow, sorry, dashboards are here. They're not going away. We can debate how useful they are till the cows come home, but executives love dashboards. Sorry.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. I'll go to my next one, which is a common topic for both you and me, right? Whatever 7-8 years ago, SAP made a prediction that HANA will be the number 2 database.
Oh my God. Ouch, dude. Ouch.
That did not happen.
Deconstructing your former employer. Ouch.
Yeah, it's not just formal employer. I actually worked on the technology, right? I mean, both when it first came out as an IBM employee and also then in SAP's engineering team. Now, the good part of it is HANA did become quite popular as a database inside SAP, right? Inside the suite, it added tremendous value. So by no means is it a failure. But I think that where SAP probably got it less than right is in thinking that would be like the one size fits all solution for the world. And what actually happened is the sheer number of databases available became so big, but the same 2, 3, 4 large companies still hold vast majority of the commercial database market, right? That did not change very much at all, and SAP did not become the number 2 there, right? So I think that one needs to be called out, right? I mean, it was a little bit of a misplaced bravado, I would think.
Yeah, and this is for another show, but we could debate. I think one of the big second guesses in enterprise software is whether SAP should have open sourced HANA from the beginning. But let's table that for now. But that would make a great long discussion.
Yes, that probably needs a lot more of our other friends to join in that discussion.
Indeed. And Alan, your points that you're making on people overestimating the short term and the prediction and overall predictive technologies, just hang in there if you can, because we're going to get to some of those topics. But absolutely, you can never go wrong predicting AI is going to be bigger in the future, which leads to my next one, which is about AI. I got one from DXC Technology. Congratulations for making the cut of my least favorite predictions. This might be an IDC prediction, though I can't quite tell from the wording. But by 2021, most major businesses will provide, ready for this, some type of customer experience centered around AI as companies progress past proof of concepts and move into production. So my big problem with that prediction is, well, I guess some type of customer experience, yeah, if you include really crappy customer experiences, then maybe that's true. I don't trust that companies are going to implement so-called AI in a way that improves customer experience. And also, I would say that most of those are going to be more like robotic bots that respond to certain situations rather than learning experiences with machines. AI, to me, even in a narrow context, should imply learning from interactions. And I'm not seeing that in the customer experience space. So
we know plenty of examples of it not working really well, right? I mean, my favorite, and this would have been one of mine as well, is LinkedIn job recommendations, right? I don't know how to switch it off. Otherwise, I would have not done it. It does send me emails from time to time. I think every week or every month, something like that. But often enough to annoy me. Usually, it is for a truck driver in Phoenix or a vice president of a catering company, things of that nature. And I know what is happening, right? They are either trying to match my location, saying that I live in Phoenix, or they see my title as vice president and they look at the next vice president opening. It's like so bad. It's so ridiculously bad that I think they're better off not doing this, right? Than doing any recommendation at all. I haven't so far, and I've used LinkedIn for a very long time. Unbelievable that in all these years, I haven't seen one recommendation that makes sense. I mean, that takes some doing, right? That how can you be so bad that at the end, right, in 10 years, you cannot make one recommendation that makes sense?
Absolutely. And Alan says it's the little things in AI. Autocomplete sentences in Gmail is a perfect example. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I actually turn off Gmail's auto stuff. I can't stand it, but there are some examples of real improvements. I would say, like, for example, voice recognition's gotten so much better. I regularly use in my journalistic work I use Otter AI for transcription of my interviews, and I'm exceedingly impressed by how the progress that they've made. Whether I would consider that true AI or not, we could discuss, but it's definitely, that stuff's gotten better and better. So those specific use cases make sense.
It does. And it has disrupted some industries as well, right? I mean, one that I'm very familiar with was when I was in college, school and college. India had a very big industry on medical transcription, right? So the rough idea is a doctor in the US would, speak into a device to record, and then that gets transferred over to India, and then somebody will type it up and send it back. Massive industry. I remember seeing so many advertisements for those jobs in newspapers and so on, till these voice to text translators started becoming really good. That industry practically vanished or got cut down in size. That now when I go to visit my mom, I don't see those anymore, right? It's not a mainstream thing. I'm sure it exists in some shape or form even today, but it's not a big thing. So AI absolutely is making, and that is machine learning, right? It does make use of machine learning in a significant way. And it has gotten better, and a lot of research has happened. There are all kinds of ethics challenges that come with that too. But nevertheless, so AI has scaled in many situations. But I will make a point in the enterprise setup, right? There are many, many companies that we work with that we routinely see have large data science teams that can do prototypes and come up with good ideas, but they rarely scale. And there are many, many reasons why things don't scale. It is kind of like how security was in the past, where security was not like an enterprise-wide thing. Now it is, thanks to all the cyber threats and so on. Now you can say, like in the last minute, like if I'm sending code to production the week before Thanksgiving, and it's going to give the company a lot of money because of some fancy algorithm. If I say there is a security bug, the CIO will not think two times, right? They will say, pull the code out of production. Nobody will take that risk. But if I say, I suspect that might be using a biased data or biased model, right? The AI algorithm, I'm not sure how many companies will stop it, right? AI is going through that path where there is some more maturity that is needed before it becomes mainstream in a highly scaled environment. There are hundreds of reasons which we can't get into today, but certainly it has not scaled like it was predicted. Nowhere close to it in enterprise land.
Right. Yeah. I think when I was talking about the pervasiveness of AI, I was really thinking more about things like consumer technology and stuff. It's true that the enterprise scalability of AI is limited unless you want to throw in things like fraud protection and very narrow industry use cases where there has been some strides. But
absolutely.
All right. So what's your number 2? Most hate, dislike prediction.
So I somehow have only one more, not 2 more.
Okay. Well, let's do your number 1 then. That's fine.
The number 1 was by 20, and I forgot which analyst firm predicted it. Maybe multiple ones did, that by 2020 there will be this massive job loss due to automation, right?
Yeah.
That certainly did not happen, right? That most certainly did not happen. Even though there is plenty of automation, it's not that automation came down. Automation actually increased many fold, even between like 2015 and today. And I live this life, right? So I get to watch this up close and personal. Automation did happen in to an extreme, but the people just got redeployed, right? The skills that people had, it just enhanced, and they started doing other things. I don't know of one person, at least in the limited worldview that I have, I don't know of anybody who got let go because of automation. And those skills, right, that they had in 2015 still continue to be relevant. If you were a good Java programmer, then you're still a very good consultant or engineer today, right? Or much more valuable today, because lots and lots more high value tasks need such skills today. But I think the original prediction was probably not about the people I'm talking about. It's probably people with lower level of skills. But even there, I'm not seeing people, in shipping base getting, getting fired or anything of that nature either, right? So I think that was also a rather misplaced fear that automation in the short term will cause massive unemployment. Pandemic, unfortunately, caused massive unemployment, but I don't think automation caused massive unemployment, at least not yet.
So just real quick on that, why do you think everyone got that wrong? What did they miss?
I think exuberance for technology, and some of it was, I at least with a couple of analysts, I wouldn't call them friends, but people who are well respected, right? There was a bit of grandstanding on that issue, right? It's not that it was backed by data. There were people who questioned it, with data, like Vinny, our friend, Vinny Machandani, was on the right side of that equation, right? Saying, no, automation is not going to do that in near term. So over a long period of time, these things might all happen. UBI and other things need to be discussed. Yes, that's all fair. But in the short term, right, all those predictions were dead wrong. And I think it was people overestimating the maturity of technology, right? AI is a classic example, right? If AI did scale, probably every call center agent would have been displaced by now. But AI did not scale to that extent, right? So a lot of it was just misplaced trust that technology will mature faster in the short term. So and like what your viewer, I forgot his name, was it Alan, who just mentioned about this prediction or this comment, right? About the impact of technology in the short term gets overestimated.
Oh, the short term, right? Yeah.
That is a spot on comment, right? I think that's exactly what happened.
Absolutely. All right, let's breeze through our number ones because I want to get to your top 5 favorite blog posts. So my number one, it's really just a classic headline. Robots powered by soft skills could become future business leaders. I just love it. Like we're ready to have robots take over leadership. To be fair, I think what happens is there's so many bad leaders that we start thinking that machines could do a better job. But I just love it.
I'm convinced that this prediction will come true at some point, exactly for that reason, because there are so many bad leaders in the world that this should not be that difficult to do. But letting go of the bad leader, good leader construct, in a classic hierarchical organization, many levels of the hierarchy are purely for aggregation function, right? As in somebody needs to take $10 and allocate it to 10 people based on something, or some other person needs to aggregate $1 from 10 people and report up. These are eminently things that a robot should be doing, should have never been done by a human being to begin with. These, I wish and pray that these get automated. Right? Those managers have no reason to exist in the corporate world and should go away.
Well, see, I think that's Alan's point, right? He's saying, isn't that what B schools have been churning out for years? I mean, look, crappy robotic leaders make us want to replace them with machines. I totally get that.
Yeah, crappy managers should at least be replaced with better managers, right? There's no sympathy in my mind, right? Because I've had crappy managers in the past. I try really, the day that people tell me I'm a crappy manager is when I stop working in the corporate world, right? World doesn't need crappy managers. They do more disservice than practically anything else I can think of.
Yeah, Den, I don't think the Dennis Howlett robot is quite ready for prime time yet.
I saw a flash that he came in.
If we can approximate that, then AI has truly arrived, but I don't see it. I don't see it yet. Though the press release did imply that machines are getting better at sarcasm, I would certainly enjoy seeing that, but haven't run into it yet. My personal home devices never use sarcasm on me. I would enjoy it, but all right, Vijay, let's move on to the your top 5 blog posts because we're running out of time, and I don't want to miss this part. What we've done, I've challenged Vijay to pick his top 5 blog posts of all time, and that's a considerable amount of posts, Vijay. Most of which you typed on your iPhone, but that's a whole different discussion.
There are probably less than 10% of, or maybe less than 5% of all blogs that I typed on a laptop. So 95% of my posts are on the phone. If there was no WordPress app on the phone, Vijay wouldn't be a blogger, right? I mean, that much is very clear.
And before we get into your top 5, and I'm going to pick out a few that I liked as well as we go. The one interesting thing is that when you started your blog off your own and Vijay Says blog, you gave yourself pretty wide latitude to write about whatever the heck you wanted, from India to pets to
music to food to technology to leadership to whatever, right? Yeah.
So anyway, I think that served you well over the years. It gives you a pretty wide berth, and we kind of talked about how the pandemic has kind of brought that into focus, where the blurring of the lines between personal and professional. But you were onto that in your blog a long time ago. So anyhow, so Vijay, give us your top 5. Start with number 5.
Number 5 was an HR themed blog where I said talent cannot be managed. That caused a lot of interest in the circle of friends we have, right, in social media. But what I meant by talent there is the extraordinarily talented people. And that caused a lot of grief, because that's the general idea of talent management is to unify a management system for all kinds of talent. And I was just trying to point out that doesn't work to the supremely talented people. And then Chris Payne and I got into a back-to-back blog chain where he blogged based on mine and I blogged based on his, and so on. I think it went like back and forth 2 or 3 times. And it was one of my most read blogs of all time, most commented blogs of all time as well. My number 4 is I put myself in the client's shoes, and I wrote a blog on 6 tips for clients buying SAP services. This one, mixed reaction.
I'll bet, yeah. You're trying to sales-proof your own prospects there? Ouch.
So I just told clients what to look for, right, in a consulting company.
Were there any of them where they were particularly controversial?
I actually don't remember the content all that much. A few years ago, but what I do remember is in the next maybe 3 months after I wrote that blog, customers that I was talking to, trying to sell things, would pull up this blog, show me, and say that, okay, I'm just going to follow these 6 steps, right, to see how you stack up. And I was like, oh my God, if I thought, right, that you would have read that, I would have at least read it one more time before walking into this meeting, because now I don't remember anymore what are the 6 things that I suggested on the top of my head. But nevertheless, right, it proved one point to me very quickly, which was good. It establishes an instant rapport with the client, because whatever I think of a topic, right, I write it with no holds barred in my blog. So by the time, I get into a meeting, and if they don't know me, they would usually Google me or something. These blogs will come up, right? So they have a good idea of what my point of view is. So we have a starting point for most discussions. So blogs did help me on that front, right? It was not done consciously, but it did have some good karma payback.
A couple comments from Den Hallett I want to bring in. First of all, he says you upped your Zoom game, so he likes your production values. But he also says you're a great storyteller. Follow that and you'll be a star. And I would also add to that, to Den's point around storytelling. And I want to get in at the end of our show. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of blogging on your career. But the other thing I would add is I think you're in your blog, you're a very relatable person, and you put a human side to things. You don't present yourself as like a top executive sharing guru tips. You you acknowledge your own failings and struggles. And also, who else would pick, which is my number 4 for you, please read this before you get a puppy. I mean, how many enterprise blogs would use that as a topic? But it's the kind of thing that kind of is disarming. And, I think you spice it up just enough with stuff like that. So anyhow, that's my number 4 pick for you.
Oh, I appreciate that. That one, I got a lot of new friends thanks to.
Oh, and by the way, some good photos in that one too.
Yes. So and I got a new puppy as well around that time, right? So that was part of the reason why I wrote it. And seeing him, a lot of my friends got new puppies as well. But they all had similar questions, and I'm like a constant reference guy for puppy questions. It's very common because I've kept dogs for a long time. So that was the background for that. But I enjoyed writing that one. My number 3 pick was we implemented SAP HANA in 4 days and lived to tell the story. That was when SAP HANA was brand new, as an SAP hadn't even publicly come out with it. And I was running what was called the forward engineering team in IBM at that time. Right, our charter was to look at new technologies and see if there is a future for our clients. So me, Gagan, Thomas Krogel, a few guys, Rafikul, and we got together. It was a complete group of nearly strangers. I knew Gagan from before, but nobody else. So these were IBMers from around the world that I got together, and none of us knew HANA, as in nobody on the planet knew HANA outside SAP labs at that time. And we stood up a server in one of our data centers, we implemented it, and we did a project on it. And it worked, and it took only 4 days. It was good enough that Vishal then put it up on a TechEd or Sapphire keynote.
I was going to say, I'll bet you got a nice friendly phone call from your buddy Vishal after that one.
Exactly. So
SAP marketing could never have conjured up something that brilliant in a million years.
Yeah, it was like a working capital management solution. I think I showed that to Dennis, and he later wrote something on ZDNet or something about that. But that was a lot of fun, not just because of the blog. The blog definitely proved the point that things can be done fast and for very little money, and it wouldn't take a structured team, right? A lot of people passionate about a topic, just like how Dennis was part of, and I think you were too, right? Of part of SME, the messaging platform that was developed on SAP and shown in one of the TechEd code jams. So that was the inspiration for us too, that, if we get enough interested people to come together, that one could work.
Just real quick, Vijay, we got a few things. Den made the point around your authenticity that a lot of people find terrifying to disclose that kind of stuff. And I agree. I mean, I think that's what gives your writing some power that other people don't have. And then Mark really liked your puppy blog. So you have some puppy fans there.
There you go.
And then Den actually has a project question for you. I'm not sure if this is within the scope of stuff you can answer, but he's talking about Amex. How did you make a GBS GTS work in a way that is win-win-win? Are you able to talk about that? Or
Yeah. I'm happy to talk about that. I can't talk about specifics, but the question is something I can probably answer. So I did not come from an infrastructure background myself, right? I'm a good engineer, so I understand technology, and I've done consulting, right? The management consulting, technology consulting for a long time. So that part, the GBS part of the business, I knew very well. But what also worked very well in my favor is the leader for the GTS business is a very dear friend. And I had a lot of mentors who grew up in the GTS business who were completely willing to coach me in a short period of time. So it was done the hard way. I had to learn a lot from scratch that I did not know. It's a new business model. The technology, I'm largely familiar with IBM's technology, so that was the easy part. But how that business was run is most simply, it was a bunch of very generous people who took the time to teach me, right, and answer 100 questions. So that is all there is to it, right? No big secret. Plus, everything that we solve at Amex, right? it's a client that we have had for a long time. So it's not as if we wake up one day trying to impress them. It's a relationship that has existed for 107 years. So that gives me a lot of freedom because that trust is already there. That when they have a problem, then we can think through a solution jointly. It's very rare that we have to go to a back room, find a solution, come back, right? So we work very closely with each other. So most of the solutions are built together. We have very transparent conversations to the extent possible. So no big secret behind great working relationships, right? Both with the GTS friends as well as with the client. That trust is the reason that this works, right? It's not brilliance or any secret sauce. It's just a lot of learning and a lot of trust with people. And that's true for most things in business, right? It's all about people.
It's funny you should say that because after all the use cases I've done for Diginomica over the years now, I start pushing back on vendors a lot around trying to present these dramatic transformation stories, because what I'm really looking for is I'm looking for how gritty the partnership is, how much it was tested. I'm looking for the hard parts, and I'm looking for essentially how hard people wanted to get it right and how hard they worked to get over the hump. And to me, that's a successful project in the end. You always find that ingredient. The technology might be great, fine, but that's the thing that I always see is that you've established a trust. Otherwise, those high-stake products are never going to happen.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Den says he started with thanks, Hun, for getting that in. I'm going to assume that's a typo, and he meant to say John. I'm really hoping that's a typo. He says Mabel says hello. That's my dog walking friend. That's Den's dog. So we got a real
hello back to Mabel. She's a very, very pretty girl.
Oh, she's gorgeous. I miss her terribly, actually. Mark, trust is the not so secret sauce indeed, right? And Mark, that's why I think unvarnished stories are the good stories, because in the end, every project had really miserable points. And quit throwing up these case studies that don't discuss them, because they happen. Let's find out how you got over them. That's the key.
Yeah, I'll make a 30-second commercial on that point, right? A lot of AI projects talk about, the cool stuff that AI did. If you talk to the machine learning team that worked on it, 90% of their struggles probably is to clean the data, right? The most unsexy part of their life is these PhD level, super intelligent people sitting there cleaning the data and trying to figure out how to make use of what they have, right? That almost never gets discussed, right? And the sheer amount of effort and pain that goes into making it work. No, everybody jumps into the cool statistical models and the latest, greatest hardware on which it runs and quantum computing and so on, right? No, 90%, right? Maybe I'm exaggerating a little, but it is certainly more than 80%. I can say that with certainty. Of the effort is in just cleaning up data, right? Which is not a particularly high-skilled task, but it is boring and painful, but has to be done. Needs to be talked about, right? But it doesn't get airtime.
I remember chatting with a startup, chatbot startup a couple of years ago and making fun of how dumb bots are. And the guy got mad and he said, my bot is as dumb as your data. If you give me good data, I'll give you a good bot. I thought that was a really interesting point. And finally, we have a nice clarification from Dennis that Hun equal John. So I'm glad we got that sorted. Thanks, Den. All right. Just real quick on my number 3 VJ post. We're not going to discuss it because I want to get to the last few. But my number 3 is I think a couple of years ago, relearning leadership again. And I just picked it because you have a lot of interesting posts on leadership, and you talk in the post around how your interest in leadership started for a simple and awkward reason. In the early part of your career, you had some really awful managers. So you kind of go through that and talk about how learning to be a good leader is a journey and never a destination, and there's no magic bullets and such. And so anyway, I thought that post kind of set the tone for a lot of your leadership posts, which I encourage readers to check out. So
I've had spectacular failures in my career, right? So it comes from a point of authenticity for that reason, that lots of stumbling blocks throughout, and I had some pretty crappy managers and some exceptionally good managers. So I tried to do more of what the exceptional guys did for me, and I try really, really hard not to let my team suffer what I suffered when I had crappy managers. So that's the gist of it.
Cool. What's your number 2 all-time favorite blog post?
Number 2 it was a close choice between number 2 and number 1. Number 2 is the Road Ahead for SAP Consultants series.
The classic. Yep.
Especially the last one I did, which was 7 or 8 years ago, on my own blog. Usually I used to write it in SAP's blog. Recently, somebody found me and sent me a link from one of the older SAP SEN blogs, but it doesn't have my name anymore because I think SAP, when they migrated platforms or something, it lost my identity. So I think it's now says something like posted by anonymous user or something like that. But those were well read, well discussed, and I used to spend a lot of time talking and analyzing before I posted those. So those are emotionally very, very close to my heart, and I think I would at least like to think it helped a lot of people.
This is Jonathan Yarmus clarifying something from an earlier comment on underestimating change even in the medium term. Go back in the comment thread to see how that emerged.
That was the comment on the short versus long-term AI impact, right? And Jonathan is totally right? Absolutely, 200%.
I'm not showing the mullet denim. It's in an awkward phase right now, so when it gets in a better phase, we'll show it off. Dana has another project question for you, Vijay. This one, I think, a little tougher question. Where do you see the trust issue going in the digital world? Could Amex be that trusted org? If so, how? Digital trust is tougher. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I cannot answer the Amex question, right? That would be getting into a level of detail that I probably shouldn't go into in this call. But the question of trust is still largely a valid one. Many different technology solutions to that as well. But one of the recent discussions that came up is with the allegations of massive fraud in US elections, and one camp saying that digital voting is better than the paper votes, centralized voting is better than the decentralized ones, so on and so forth. But one thing I think we can learn is there are places like elections where a decentralized, rather manual and maybe inefficient in terms of time process has a ton of advantages over digital, right? So when we talk about trust, it is not just digital, right? Just because we have a very recent example to talk about, but within the domain of trust itself, the digital aspects are super key. One of the things that I am now struggling to think through is, if and when this pandemic thing goes away and we get back on the road and I start flying, hopefully not as much as I used to in the past. I have a few million miles under my belt, not looking forward to a lot more. But if you are, and things like your vaccination records and so on need to be there, right, for you to be boarding a plane or a train and so on. How do we establish a trusted identity for that, right? As in somebody that everybody agrees on, that if I say I'm vaccinated, that record should be trusted somehow, right? So will it get attached to my global entry card, right, or my trusted traveler number, or will it go sit with my American Airlines frequent flyer number? But who trusts what is a significant difficulty. And it is very difficult for any one organization to be trusted, right? That is the crux of the difficulty. Not everybody will agree that any one organization can be trusted. We don't even trust each other's governments in most cases, right? So these passport checks and visas and so on, right, go into a lot of issues, which I faced a lot in my life, right, as a traveler. There are countries where it's partly as a joke, but it did happen. People open a visa, scan and all of that, but then because I have a very long name, they count the number of characters in my name, and then they count the number of characters that show in the computer to double check whether I am who I say I am, right? That is the level of mistrust that exists across entities around the world.
Yeah, and Den's point around trust being the elephant in the room for digital biz is, I think, absolutely true. And, it dictates a lot of decisions I make about what I do with e-commerce online for sure.
For sure.
And I also find it very weird, the brands I do trust, like I trust Amazon. Why should I? But I kind of do, right? Because I've been ordering for them for years, but it's weird. Like, should I really trust them? Anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and convenience trumps many things, right? I mean, that's the other difficult. Amazon is a classic example, right? My family is a heavy shopper on Amazon as well, right? Do I trust them is a question that I'm very uncomfortable answering myself, right? Knowing how technology works, there are definitely reasons to worry about, but convenience trumps a lot of that, right? And it's a tough.
I don't trust them with my doorbell security, I'll tell you that, but that's a whole different conversation. All right, my number 2 VJ blog post. There were a few controversial ones from your archives. I already mentioned the Agile one earlier, which was classic Agile bashing. A number of years ago, this was the slippery slope of predictive analytics, which was I saw you kind of putting a stake in the ground in that blog post around all the predictive and AI hype that was to come in the years to follow. And there's a classic paragraph in here. After the Super Bowl game finished, I saw on Twitter that SAP had predicted that Denver will win over Seattle in a close match. As it turned out, Seattle won a rather one-sided match with a very young side. A few friends on Twitter pointed out that SAP made a bad prediction before the game, and they are not wrong. But anyhow, you get in trouble when you make high-stakes predictions. And, anyway, I thought that was a classic post.
Yeah, and a big part of predictions, right? When it comes to binary decisions, predictions are pretty risky, right? Like who will win, who will not, and so on. People don't win. If you say that, candidate X has a 60% chance of winning, doesn't translate to candidate X is the one who's going to win. And this we face in business all the time, right? Because we do a lot, in my line of work, right, for the last several years, we do a lot of these projects where we have to weigh two options and come up with some analysis that says one has a higher chance of occurring than the other. And usually before I make a presentation, I do a little spot check on the on the minimal probability knowledge of the audience. And many a times I've taken 10 minutes to level set on the fundamentals. This is what things mean. If you say statistical significance, this is what statistical significance means. It doesn't mean importance, right? So these kinds of things, a part of predictive analytics is also an education problem,
I think
right?
You had a really good one on correlation and causality at one point too that tied into all of that.
Yeah,
the difference
highly correlated doesn't mean it makes any sense in real life. It also doesn't mean that it is important, right? So cheese price and a number of shoes available on a desk might be correlated, right? Because just mathematically those numbers are correlated. It doesn't mean squat, right? It's so when people don't have that sense of business, or if they don't understand the statistical terms and we throw it around lightly, all kinds of misinterpretations happen, and people make very binary decisions like 69% chance of something happening, and they would say, okay, then let me double down and throw all my budget into option A. No, please don't do that, right? That's the whole idea here, right? To educate them on what it actually means. When a model tells them something, it is not easily. And this is also why predictions made by AI don't always translate very nicely into dashboards, because dashboards need to give people some pretty precise information, or people generally tend to think in binary terms, right? Yes, no, or low, medium, high, and so on. And then they make decisions based on that without comprehending what this model is trying to say. So a little bit of that is purely an education level set before you present this information.
All right, before we end the show, we're going to do our number 1 picks. I've got a doozy, and we're going to do yours. But before that, I want to get to Den's follow-up question because he's nailing us down here. Convenience is fine in consumer, but what about B2B? Thoughts?
B2B also convenience actually trumps in many, many cases, right? Unless it is for regulatory reasons or it's about the general ledger and so on. Convenience actually trumps vast majority of business transactions too, right? So the general idea, and most salespeople or sales managers coach their staff, right, that lower the friction, higher your chance of success. So even if your price is high and so on, if you make it easier to work with you, generally companies buy from you, right? So even in B2B transactions, this ease of doing business usually trumps every other obstacle in lots of cases, not in all cases, but in lots of cases.
One thing that's interesting though, Vijay, that I think has changed in B2B is that I think 10 years ago, there was a lot more catering to the so-called convenience of the super user who could understand and work their way through 10 to 20 different screens in an ERP program to get something done. And these days, I think convenience is defined much more by business users and casual users rather than the super user might have to give up their super user view in order to move to a different software program that's more amenable to business users where adoption is now everything.
Totally. I do have one grief, though, as a largely casual user of many of these systems, right? HR systems and so on. And I wrote a blog on that recently as well. The idea should not be to make the casual user have a miniaturized version of what a super user does, right? Like for me, I had to go make a small update on some HR little thing, payroll deduction of some sort. And it took some time to figure out how to get that transaction. I had to Google, I had to call a friend for help and so on. And my point was, why, right? This should not be this complex. If it's a one-click thing, then why do I need to go through 3 screens and look at documentation to understand? That's a power user problem. That should not be how so the casual user experience is something that all these companies, this particular example was Workday, right? So I'll mention it up front. But this is not just a Workday problem. There are many, many casual user use cases where the UX is not simplified. Many a times, I only care about sending an SMS and get an answer, right? I don't need a screen. I don't need an app. Don't make me do these things, right? So people have to, these big software vendors have to rethink the casual user experience. The solution cannot be that I took a super user screen and eliminated 15 fields. Maybe we don't need a screen at all, right? Why make life more difficult than it needs to be?
Den says, thanks for putting the question up. And the rule of the show is we interrupt the gurus to answer the questions. So this isn't the typical talking head crap you're going to see on LinkedIn where people drone on and on. I interrupt the speakers all the time. That's just how it goes. This is envisioned as a talk radio style thing. So, and Den says also he wants us to get you some Grecian 2000 subscriptions. So I don't know. Den's got a lot of aesthetic issues with stuff, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We know that Den's probably never going to live down some of his early video appearances. So
JDOD.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'm going to, before we get to your number one, I want to do my number one because I want to save yours for last. So my number one is from 2014, and I encourage readers to go back in the Vijay Says blog to check this one out. Why I Am Not Holding My Breath on Digital Transformation. An all-time classic where you begin by insulting the entire digital transformation industry by comparing digital transformation to change management. And then basically people couldn't sell change management anymore. So they switched it over. And bottom line, check out the comments to the blog, check out Esteban Kolsky's reactions, all classic interaction between Esteban and Vijay on here, including where he says to you, a well-reasoned post relying on an antiquated stance. Never thought I'd see this from you. And we take it from there into a very spicy comment thread. You're gonna friggin' love that post. You got to go check it out. It's all time.
There are 2 things I remember about that post. One was that I was flying from New York to Phoenix, when Esteban started commenting. So I was commenting from a plane seat on my iPhone. And the second part was, I think less than a year after that post is when my title at IBM actually changed to VP of Digital Transformation.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the paradox or curse of your post. Whenever you deconstruct something, you're going to be selling it. That's just how it goes.
That is how it
So,
goes. That is absolutely how it goes. I will never live that down, right? I mean, how many people gave me grief on, when they saw that title?
yeah. And now you're an agile digital transformation specialist who can help clients with their blockchain problems.
I still don't say digital transformation at all. I
Yeah.
continue to believe it's a meaningless term, right? It's a catch-all that means nothing to me. I mean, I won't diss on people who say it these days, but I've given up on it. But I still don't say digital transformation at all. I don't know what that means, honestly. Even today, I don't know what that means, right? So I would. I'm still consistent in my belief system that it did not mean anything to me 5 years ago. It still doesn't mean much to me today.
All right, Vijay, drum roll. What's your number one all-time favorite blog post, man?
So there might be a recency bias to this, right? So with that caveat, it is a post that I wrote the day I became a US citizen, a little over a year ago.
Cool.
It literally is my most read blog of all time, right? In the 10 or 15 years that I've blogged. It also is special for another reason that on LinkedIn, I saw the good and bad of the world in one shot in a very short period of time, right? In the 1 hour after I posted that, 90% of the people, I put it on LinkedIn for a simple reason that vast majority of the people that I have known over my career are across countries, and LinkedIn, generally everybody will notice that update. I don't have everyone's email and phone numbers and so on to share the news. So that's why I put it on LinkedIn. Otherwise, this probably would have been in Facebook. So I did put it on LinkedIn just so that people see that. Unfortunately, a lot of people, practically all from India, took serious offense that I'm celebrating losing Indian citizenship. Thankfully, 90% of the people who commented were very positive and supportive. But it was an emotional moment for me because I'd already lived here for close to 20 years at that time. And that legal immigration system is pretty broken, but I did get through it the right way, and I was pretty proud that I did. But to see the reaction on these either extremes, right? Complete strangers congratulating me, welcoming me, and then again, complete strangers disowning me, having no idea of my attachment to India and that my parents still live there, and so on. I mean that. So from a blogging perspective, I often think, right, of the good and bad of blogging. From an engagement perspective, that blog just goes to the top of my list.
Yeah. And, the other thing for me too is, I don't want to get too political on this show. It's not the point, but that embodies like what I've always cared about with the US is this notion that, the best, the most passionate, the most talented people like that love it here and want to be a part of it eventually become. And I would like to think that every country would have a similar mentality towards embracing immigrant populations. And unfortunately, that's not where the world has been headed so much lately. So I think it really resonates for that reason as well. And unfortunately, it's not as common a story as it should be right now. So
yeah. I agree. I'm sure it will change for the better, right? But these stories need to be told.
Oh, 100%. All right. Well, Vijay, before we wrap, I just want to ask you, with your blogging exploits over the years, do you think your career would be in the same place if you hadn't blogged at all? Would you be in the role that you're in now? Would you have achieved what you had? Like, what is the relationship there?
This is just to be honest. John did give me an indication, so I did think about it right before I came on this video. Here is what I think. I'm fairly sure I probably would have progressed through my career just the same somehow, but I don't think I would have enjoyed it nearly as much. Blogging gives me a lot of perspective because it makes me think hard before I do something. It is definitely a venting mechanism, right? It's a sharing mechanism. It makes me, it's a I don't know what is the right way to say it, right? Makes me fulfilled in some ways. So from a pure career progression perspective, I mean, what helps me progress in my career, my technology skills, my sales skills, and so on. One way or the other, I would like to think that, and I'm sure blogging helped. I'm not saying it didn't, but with or without it, probably I would have made it to where I am today. But I have zero doubts that I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much as in by like an order of magnitude. I can say with certainty, right? Blogging is a big part of my identity now. What makes me feel happy. And blogging, not in the sense of blogging on my blog itself, right? It could be a tweet, it could be a Facebook post or a LinkedIn post. But that ability to express myself when I want to, without fear of repercussion and so on, that's a huge part. And it is quite possible, maybe I'm not totally objective, maybe it did help me. There is at least one case where it did help me significantly, and Mark Finnan knows this. When I was a young senior manager in IBM, thanks to blogging, I had the ability to, or the good fortune to go meet several top leaders at SAP, McDermott and Hasso and Vishal and so on. And that happened at a time where, people a few levels above me in IBM at the time wouldn't have that much access to the same executives. And that did help me for sure, right? So that one incident I do remember definitely helped me in getting some visibility in the organization. But and then, as I mentioned before, there are clients who recognize me from my blogs and consequently have an easier time building a rapport, which eventually leads to faster sales and so on, right? So indirect ways, it has helped for sure. But in terms of a tangible nature, I can't say for sure whether it actually helped my career or not. But in terms of making me fulfilled, which I think is much more important than whether I got a promotion due to blogging, blogging did help me a ton, feeling good about myself, and also my ability to pass what I learned to others, which is very important to me. And also to learn, right? Because vast majority of the time when I post something, people will react, and I usually learn a ton from that reaction. So yeah, blogging has been a huge net positive for me.
Yeah, I kind of remember that anecdote and we've bashed SAP a few times during this video, so might as well throw out that was part of the SAP Blogger program, which was a very, very ahead of its time type of program in terms of putting so-called influencers that didn't fit into a classic analyst category in the room with some of the top execs at SAP and having these open exchanges, which kind of set a standard that, I like to try to find wherever I can. And it's still hard to find in a lot of places. And I feel like I remember that, was it you, I think around this time where you showed your manager your schedule and they were like, how did you get meetings with like Bill and Haas?
Yeah, it was at that time, right? It was probably 10 plus years ago.
Like, I can't get those meetings. I mean, that's unbelievably classic. I mean, that's just so funny.
Yeah, there was one other incident that now I remember. Dan and I both flew to Germany, to Frankfurt, right? To review something with Jim Schnabe just before his Sapphire presentation. And it was my boss's boss who gave me a ride to San Jose Airport to catch my flight. And I told him, that this is why I'm flying to Germany. And he was super duper impressed. It also turned out that Jim said something very nice about me to my boss's boss at the time, right after that meeting. So it checked out as well. And he told me that, hey, for a second, I did not believe your story in its entirety. But then my very next meeting with Jim, he did say that, Vijay was very helpful. So that also helped, right? And none of that would have happened without the blogging and Madeline and Mark and others promoting it and so on.
Yeah, and I think it's also sort of the, the blurring of the lines between content and community is the big thing, right? Like that your blogs put you in touch with so many people that you never would have known. And, and I think that's a lot of the power of it as well,
Correct.
I mean, our friendship was sparked by me reading some of your road ahead blogs and stuff. And
that's exactly true. That's how I met you. That's how I met Den, many others, right? Mark and so on. And I also now remember that I got into Twitter because you introduced me to Twitter when it had, I don't know, like 1,000 people or so in it at that time. But without your prompting, I would have never blogged for sure. And without your prompting, I would have never been on Twitter either, right? So, in many ways, John, you have influenced a ton on what I do now.
Well, who knew? Just trying to do my thing is all. So thanks for staying over. Thanks to all who came into the peanut gallery as well. Much appreciated. And we'll do this again. But Vijay, really appreciate you looking back at all those blogs and picking out your faves for us. It was fun.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. And thanks for everybody who chimed in between as well. Next time, maybe we can get Den and Mark and others onto the video as well, right? So this was wonderful, John. Great format. Thanks for having me again. And hopefully it's not several years before we do this again.
Yeah, exactly. All right, folks. Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks.